Hello grade 9s. Today we're going to look at factorizing, especially to all three types of factorizing. Now the first type of factorizing that we did was taking out a common factor. So let's look at the first example. 4x cubed minus 12x squared y plus 16x. I must take out the highest common factor here. So if we look at all the numbers, 4, 12 and 16, the highest common factor that I can take out is 4. But that's not all. In all three terms, there's also an x. But the highest x that I can take out is only x. I cannot take out x squared because here, in that term, there is no x squared. Alright? I hope you all agree with me, but 4x is the highest common factor that I can take out. Now I still need to determine what's going to be left inside the brackets. How do I do that? You take your first term and you divide it with a common factor that you took out. Now 4x cubed divided by 4x will give me an answer of x squared, because 4 divided by 4 is just 1 and x cubed divided by x is x squared. Now you keep your negative. Now I take the second term and I divide it with a common factor that you took out. 12x squared y divided by 4x. That will be, let's see, 12 divided by 4 is 3. X squared y divided by x. There's only going to be left one x and also the y. Okay? You keep the plus. Now you take your last term and you divide it with a common factor that you took out, and 16x divided by 4x, 16 divided by 4 is 4 and the x's will cancel out. There you go. That is your answer. Remember, we can check if we factorized it correctly by multiplying it back in. You don't have to do this. Please don't show this in your answer, but this is just for yourself. If you multiply that 4x back into the bracket with all three terms inside, you are supposed to get your answer, the original expression that you started with. Right, let's look at question B. The expression that we have here is 6x squared y minus 3xy plus 9xy squared. Now, these terms are not similar, so I cannot subtract or add them. I have to factorize them. So I have to take out the highest common factor. Now between 6, 3 and 9, the highest common factor will be 3. There is an x in all three of these terms, but the highest x that I can take out will be, I hope you all agree, x. There's also a y in all three of these terms, but the highest y that I can take out is only y to the power of 1. Now I have to determine what's going to be left inside the brackets. So you take the first term and you divide it with a common factor that you took out. 6 divided by 3 is 2. X squared divided by x is just x, and the y's will cancel out. Keep the negative. Now you take the second term and you divide it with a common factor that you took out. Everything will cancel out, the 3 and the 3, the x and the x, the y and the y. But what is left? Remember, 3 divided by 3 is 1. Please write the 1 there. Then you keep the plus, and now you say 9xy squared, the last term, and you divide it with a common factor that you took out. 9 divided by 3 is 3. X and x will cancel out. And y squared divided by y is just y to the power of 1. And we are done. The second type of factorizing that we looked at is difference of two squares. Okay, the dots stands for difference of two squares. Right, now remember we always first look for a common factor, but between x squared and 25 there's no common factor that I can take out. So I know then that this must be difference into squares because we have a negative and we have a square and we have a square. Right. Now how do we factorize difference of two squares? there will be two brackets. One will be a positive, one will be a negative. It doesn't matter in which order you put it. Then, in your mind, you take the square root of the first term. Please don't write that square root there, but just in your mind. Alright, so the square root of x squared is x, so x will be the first term in both your brackets. And then you take the square root of the last term in your mind, and the square root of the last term, the square root of 25 is 5. So 5 will be the last term in both your brackets. Let's look at 2b. Now guys, I cannot get the square of 2. That won't be an easy number to write down. I cannot get the square root of 162. Remember we said first look for a common factor. Is there a common factor? Yes, there is. I can take out a 2. 2 is the common factor that I can take out. Now we have to determine what's going to be left inside the brackets. So you take your first term and you divide it with a common factor. 2x squared divided by 2 is going to give me x squared. Keep the minus, and 162 divided by 2 is then 81. Now, if you look at this bracket here, that can factorize further because it's difference of two squares. Okay, so just drag that 2 down, and now that x squared minus 81 can factorize into two brackets. One will be a positive, one will be a negative. It doesn't matter in which order you put it. So I take, the square root of the first term in your mind, and the square root of x squared is just x, so x will be the first term in my brackets, in both the brackets. Then take the square root of 81 in your mind, so the square root of 81 is 9. So 9 will be the last term in both your brackets. Okay, and the last type of factorizing that we looked at is to factorize a trinomial. Okay, a trinomial consists of three terms. One has a square, the other one is just to the power of 1, the middle term, and then we have a constant. Right, a constant is the term without a letter. Right, now we immediately know this is a trinomial. We identify it as a trinomial, so we know that this will factorize into two brackets. And because of this positive here, I know the two brackets will have the same sign. And then we look at the middle term sign, and I know both of them will have a negative. So the signs in the brackets will look like this. Okay, now we have to go look at the factors of 64. In other words, what times what will give me 64. Alright, there is the factors. It can be 64 times 1, it can be 32 times 2, it can be 8 times 8. But we have to get to 16. Okay, now tell me, will this 64 and 1, will that bring me to 16? Definitely not. Will 32 and 2 bring me to 16? Also not. So we're going to look at this one, 8 and 8, because 8 and 8 will bring me to 16. All right, so then we take the square root of the first term. The square root of x squared is x, so x will be the first term in both your brackets, and we said we're going to use the factors 8 and 8, that one. All right, so 8 and 8 will be the last term in both your brackets. Now guys, you can quickly check yourself just by doing the following. If you multiply the outside term, the term on the outside together, that gives you negative 8x. And if you multiply the middle two terms together, that also gives you negative 8x. And that does bring me to negative 16x in the middle. Alright, so I am correct. Alright, let's look at the second example here, b. X squared plus 2x minus 15. Okay, there's nothing that is common in all three of those terms. It's definitely no difference in two squares. So it's a trinomial, and a trinomial factorizes into two brackets. This sign here tells me the signs will differ. One will be a plus, one will be a negative. And this sign here tells me that the biggest factor will be a positive. Okay, so we know that the signs will differ, but we know that the biggest factor must come here because the biggest factor must be positive. Right, now we look at the factors of the last term. The factors are 15, that is 15 times 1 and 5 times 3. Now tell me, which factors will bring me to this positive 2x? 15 times 1, that will not bring me to 2. 5 and 3, this will bring me to 2. Do you agree? Okay, and then the highest factor must be the positive. So in this case, the highest factor will be 5, so 5 will be positive. Okay, but first let's put in the first term in both brackets. The first term in both brackets will be x because that's the square root of the first term. And then you put in your factors. All right, the highest factor will be positive, so that's 5, and the smaller factor will be 3. You will get the negative. Quickly check. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. 5 times x is a positive 5x, and that does bring me to a positive 2x that we have here in the middle. Okay, we are correct. Good. Let's look at the last example. 2x squared plus 16x plus 32. Guys, please remember to always look for a common factor. Yes, there is a common factor that I can take out, and the common factor that I can take out is 2. Alright, so what's going to stay left inside the brackets? Your first term divided by 2 gives me x squared, keep the plus. 16x divided by 2 is 8x, keep the plus, and 32 divided by 2 is 16. Right, now the middle term here is a trinomial that we can factorize further, but just drag the 2 down, and a trinomial will factorize into 2 brackets like that. Okay, because of this plus here, we know that the brackets will have the same sign, and they both will be positive. Okay, now we look at 16's factors. The factors of 16 can be 16 times 1, or 8 times 2, or 4 times 4. But we must get to 8 there in the middle. Okay, so we're not going to use 16 and 1. We're not going to use 8 and 2. 4 and 4 will bring me to 8. Okay, now remember we said first put in your first term in both terms. That's going to be x and x. And then the last term, because I said we're going to use 4 and 4, the last term in both brackets will be 4 and 4. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a worksheet. Please do the worksheet on your own, and then there will be time to mark it in class as well. There's only 8 numbers that you have to factorize, but guys, you have to first identify which type of factorizing am I going to use here. Am I going to use difference into squares? Am I going to take out a common factor? Or is it a trinomial that I have to factorize? Okay. Alright, let's mark this together. The first one here is 16x squared minus 1. Now we always first try to find a common factor. Is there a common factor between those terms? Definitely not. Is it difference into squares? Yes, it is. There is a difference between 2 squares. Alright, so how do we factorize difference into squares? There's going to be a bracket. One is going to be a positive, one is going to be a negative. Then you take the square root of the first term. The square root of the first term is 4x, so 4x will be the first term in both your brackets, and the square root of 1 will be the last term in both your brackets, and the square root of 1 is just 1. There you go. Alright, question number 2. Always look for a common factor to take out first, and yes, there is a common factor. The highest common factor that I can take out here is 3a to the power of what, guys? A to the power of 2. That is the highest common factor that I can take out. Now we have to determine what's going to be left inside the brackets. 3a cubed divided by 3a2 is just a. Keep the sign. And then 27a squared divided by 3a squared is just 9. Right, let's look at question 3. B squared bracket a minus b bracket plus q squared and a bracket a minus b bracket. Right. Is there a common factor that I can take out here? Definitely. And the common factor, I hope you all can see it, is this bracket, a minus b. Right? So now we take out the bracket a minus b. We still have to determine what's going to be left inside the bracket. So you take your first term and you divide it with the common factor that you just took out. And what's going to be left? The p squared. Keep the sign. Then you take your second term and you divide it with the common factor that you took out. And that's going to give me, q squared. That's going to be left. Now guys, we cannot factorize this further. It's not difference into squares. Very clearly here is a positive. So that is your answer. I cannot go any further. Question 4. Is there a common factor that I can take out between those two terms? Yes, there is. And the common factor that I can take out is 2. All right. If I take out 2, what's going to be left inside the brackets? The first term, 2 divided by 2 is 1. Keep the sign. And then the last term, 8y squared divided by 2 is 4y squared. Okay. Now this bracket here is an example of difference into squares. Do you see that? Okay, and that can factorize even further. So we keep the 2, and now we know that it will factorize into 2 brackets. One will be a positive, one will be a negative. It doesn't matter in which order you put it. Right, take the square root in your mind of the first term, and the square root of 1 is 1. So 1 will be the first term in both your brackets. And then you take the square root of the second term. And the square root of 4y squared will be 2y. So 2y will be the second term in both your brackets. Okay, so both your brackets will look like that, except the sign will differ. Okay, question 5. That's not an example of difference into squares, that we can take out a common factor. The common factor that I can take out here is 4a and then b to the power of 3. What's going to be left inside the bracket? You take the first term and you divide it with the common factor that you took out. So negative 12a squared b to the power of 4 divided by 4ab to the power of 3 is going to be a negative. 12 divided by 4 is 3. A squared divided by a is a. And b to the power of 4 divided by b to the power of 3 is b. Now I keep the plus. Alright, and do you see that the last term is exactly the thing that you took out as your common factor? So everything will cancel out, but 4 divided by 4 is 1. So please write the 1 there. Question number 6. Is there a common factor that I can take out? Yes, the common factor is 3. What's left inside the bracket? You take the first term, divide by 3, which is your common factor. 3x squared divided by 3 is x squared. Keep the plus. 6x divided by 3 is 2x. Keep the minus. 45 divided by 3 is going to be 15. Now I have an example of a trinomial inside the brackets. Alright, so you just drag the 3 along, and a trinomial will factorize into 2 brackets. Now because of this negative here, we know that the brackets will, the signs in the brackets will differ. So one will be a plus, one will be a minus. And remember, the highest factor will be positive because the middle term is positive. Okay, so we look at the factors of 15, and the factors of 15 is 15 times 1 or 3 times 5. But we must get to 2x. So which factors am I going to use? I'm going to use 3 and 5. Okay, now we just said that the highest factor must be the positive. That's why I put the 5 in the positive and the 3 with a negative. And remember, for the first term in both brackets, I take the square root of the first term here, and the square root of x squared is just x and x. There you go. Alright, question 7. Again, there's a common factor that I can take out, and the common factor is 2. what's left inside the brackets? It's z squared. And then you take the second term, divide by the common factors. 6z divided by 2 is 3z. And then minus 80 divided by 2 is minus 40. Okay, again, here we have a trinomial that we can factorize. Just drag the 2 downwards, please. Okay, first let's look at the factors of 40. 40 times 1, it can be 20 times 2, it can be 10 times 4, it can be 8 times 5. We're going to use 8 and 5 because that's going to bring me to 3. I hope you all agree. Okay, so I just drag the 2 downwards. A trinomial will factorize into 2 brackets. Because there's a negative there, I know that the signs will differ, and the highest factor will be negative, right? Okay, so one will be a positive, one will be a negative, but we just said that the highest factor will have the negative. That's why the 8 goes there to the negative and the 5 to the positive. And then, guys, what is the square root of z squared? That's going to be z and z. Okay, the last one here. Question 8. There's no common factor that I can take out. It's definitely not difference into squares. It's a trinomial. And a trinomial can factorize into into 2 brackets. Okay, a trinomial will factorize into 2 brackets. Okay. We know because this sign is positive, we know that both signs will have the same sign. And what sign would it have? It will be both a negative. Right. Now I look at the factors of 77. That can be 77 times 1, or it can be 11 times 7. And I think that's the factors that I'm going to use because I have to get to 18. Right. Now you take the square root of the first term, x squared, or the square root of x squared is just x. So x will be the first term in both my brackets. And I'm going to use the factors 11 and 7. Remember, I said you can test yourself. X times negative 7 is negative 7x, and negative 11 times x is negative 11x, and that does bring me to negative 18x. Well done.